Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, the DOL Rule Clarification regarding back to school FFCRA leave. So I'm sure many of you attended our previous webinars in months past. The Family First Corona Response Act passed late March. It went into effect in April. And the whole FFCRA topic in and of itself is a pretty deep one. And so we got tons of other resources, but as you guys remember, back when FFCRA passed, I mean, we're talking about shutdowns in the U.S., maybe as much as 2 whole weeks, right? Of like a 14-day shutdown. Really, it wasn't the federal government who acted. It was, it was mayors and county executives and governors. And those first ones were like 30-day shutdowns and 45 and 60-day shutdowns. Well, obviously, the way the pandemic has played out is very, very different than when this law first went into effect. And so some things just weren't contemplated, like back to school. I think to a large extent, we didn't know what we didn't know, but also a lot of people who wrote the law, I think that they just assumed this would be done by now, and it's obviously not. So it's a really important topic, and the Department of Labor has come out with additional rules, additional guidance specific to back to school that we wanted to unpack that guidance for you. So real quick as I introduce my guest today. So you probably remember maps like this, right? Back in, I think they probably started popping up in everybody's web browsers sometime in March, certainly by mid and late March and early April as we're tracking this thing as it's exploding. But what a lot of people might not realize is ground zero was King County in Washington. And the first death in the United States happened in King County. That's already all the way back in end of February 29th. The only reason I bring that up is we have an office in King County. So King County, most of us outside of the Washington area would probably consider it to be greater Seattle. And we have an office just across the lake in Bellevue, Assure does. And one of the senior leaders and HR execs in that office joins me today, Shannon Chapman. She's an HR manager for Assure. She is an outsourced HR executive on behalf of several Assure clients. She is an SPHR and a SHRM SCP certified exec with experience in many, many industries, small companies, large companies, many verticals. But I think today what I'm excited, not just knowing she's a great person, she brings great practical HR experience. The fact that she sits in Bellevue, she's probably faced more COVID-related HR questions than 99% of all other HR execs in the country. So a really unique perspective, and welcome you to today's conversation, Shannon.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay, so here's what I want to do. First, I want to jump into just kind of do a high-level recap. We're not going to unpack the entire FFCRA. There's tons to it. People can jump on our website and watch several 1-hour recorded webinars on that topic, but we are going to at least give everybody a recap. And then I think it was September 11th, Department of Labor issued some updated guidance that takes effect today, the 16th. It is specifically some guidance as it relates to going back to school in that leave. So if you could, invite everybody to hop out on the website, could you just kind of take us through just the high level, Shannon, if you could, for FFCRA, what is it, what's the law, and then these mouthful acronyms, EFML, EPSL.
Okay, happy to do that. The FFCRA is an act, and it has 2 provisions. There's the Emergency Paid Family Medical Leave, EFML, and then the Emergency Paid Sick Leave, EPSL. This act, like Mike said, was effective on April 2nd, and it runs through the end of the year. Even though the act is expected to end at this time, we haven't received any further guidance regarding that, but with everything with this pandemic, this may be extended as well. So I would stay tuned. The act applies to all employers with less than 500 employees. But businesses that have less than 50 employees do not need to offer EFML if doing so would jeopardize the viability of your business. I strongly recommend that if you do fall in this category, that you reach out to your labor council before denying any kind of benefits, because the exemption has some specific guidelines that you must meet, and it's a very high threshold. Businesses will get a payroll tax credit equal to 100% of the benefits that are payable under these leaves. The amount paid can be deducted from your quarterly payroll taxes. So it's important that your payroll system is set up with these separate leave codes for FFCRA covered hours to assist in tracking this time. Most payroll companies are already aware of this. I know Assure is. And so reach out to them and make sure that these codes are all set up in your payroll system.
So Shannon, I just want to give a little bit like real life example, just kind of do some easy math for folks. So if you've got an employee, and we won't get into the details of what qualifying leave is, we got that, hop out on our website, you can see all the detail there. But if you got an employee who comes and asks for EFML, and you're less than 50 employees, which is a lot of small business owners and entrepreneurs,
Right.
We're not anybody's lawyer, so this can't constitute as legal advice. We would encourage everybody to talk to their accountants and their legal counsel on their own. But if somebody asks for $1,000 worth of vacation and you can afford it and it doesn't hurt the business, you got to give it to them. But you can then write $1,000 off on the quarterly tax return, the 941, correct?
Right, that is correct. You can contact the IRS because there are some supports out there if you cannot front load the benefits that are paid. This is if you have 50 employees or less. So there's some help out there, but just know that any benefits that you do pay, you will get a credit for 100% of whatever you pay out. So that's really important to remember.
So employers, you will take the financial hit of paying your employee for that time off, but you'll get 100% of it back on the quarterly return. So
Correct.
then that begs the question then, especially given how many businesses have been so harshly impacted by the pandemic, without giving legal advice, and we ask nobody listening to overread into this, but how would you guide small businesses to consider whether they do or don't qualify? Like, it seems to me that the language is a little bit vague on whether it will hurt your business, whether your business can afford it.
Well, I think, like I said, the threshold is pretty high to reach. So if offering these benefits would, for instance, bankrupt your organization, then you might have an out there in offering these benefits. But like I said, the standards are pretty high that you would have to meet to say you can't afford to offer these benefits.
And so if an employee comes to their boss, or the owner says, hey, I need to take this leave, and the owner says, I'd love to give it to you, we just simply can't afford it. We don't have, literally the cash doesn't exist to pay you if you're not in the job working, generating the revenue. Many industries would be like that. How should the employer respond to make sure that, beyond just empathy for the employee's situation, but to protect themselves? What steps should they be taking?
Well, I think, like I said before, I think it's really important to reach out to legal counsel before denying these benefits because of the high standard that is required of all businesses that are less than 500 employees. So I would be very cautious in denying benefits because, with the law now, there's not a lot of precedent out there, right? Because it's a new law, but there have been cases that have been filed where employers have denied benefits and then they have, received a lawsuit or a claim of unpaid wages. So be really careful there if you are planning on denying.
Yeah,
and also reach out to your HR team. They could kind of walk you through be a sounding board to talk through what issues you're having in offering this benefit.
Yeah, and Jan, I appreciate you indulging me, because the reason I wanted to press on this, I think we've got a mixed audience today, right? We got people who in fact have an HR department, or at least an HR person, an office manager with SHRM credentials, et cetera, that can really help the business make informed decisions. But a huge percentage of small businesses, they don't have an HR department, they don't have an HR person, let alone an HR department, right? And so we're not here to scare the heck out of anybody, but this is not this is uncharted waters, where in the past, there's this misconception in many ways. We did a webinar on this 2 weeks ago with a tipping point when you need to add HR, but a lot of compliance requirements when you get over 50 employees. I think our guidance here is, just because you're a small business, maybe you've got 30 employees, don't think that because you are below 50 employees, you're exempt. Seek the very best legal advice you possibly can, and measure twice, cut once before you deny benefits to someone, because that really could come back and haunt you a lot more expensive than finding a way to have paid the leave in the first place. Now, if you simply cannot pay it, the cash doesn't exist, hard to imagine that's going to come back to haunt you. But if you're kind of borderline because, hey, you're just not hitting the margins you want, but you could have in fact afforded it, you could be in a pretty dangerous situation. Anything you'd want to add there?
I think you summarized it very well. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So that's kind of did you want to talk anything about EPSL before we move on?
Well, I would like to, if I could make sure everyone on this call knows that EFML applies to all employees in your company, whether they're part-time, full-time, temporary. It excludes independent contractors, right, because they're not employees, but any employee is eligible after 30 days. This does exclude also laid off employees. Any kind of employees that are on standby are not eligible, but employees that are returning back from standby are eligible if they have worked for you for not less than 30 of the last 60 calendar days before they were laid off. So even employees returning back to the workplace, as long as they have worked 30 of the last 60 days prior to their layoff, they will be eligible. EFML also, EFML doesn't have the same eligibility requirements as the traditional FMLA. Even if your business has less than 50 employees, which is the requirement for traditional FMLA, you are still required to comply with EFML unless you meet that exemption that we just talked about. Another thing to remember is that EFML uses the same bank as traditional FMLA. So if an employee has exhausted their regular FMLA, the 12 weeks of unpaid time in the last 12 months, then they aren't eligible for EFML. So EFML and FMLA share the same time bank. So an employee would only be eligible for a total between the two leaves of 12 weeks.
All right, very good. Anything else you want to add before we talk about the?
I think I covered everything. The DOL has a great website that gives specifics on how much is paid, whether it's 2/3 of someone's income, and the waiting period and all that. All those kind of provisions of the law are on the DOL website.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the high level recap on FFCRA. Let's talk about the rule changes that the Department of Labor just released on the 11th, take effect on the 16th.
Okay, this webinar is really timely as the DOL just issued this revised regulations on September 11th to the FFCRA that, as Mike said, goes into effect today as we're recording on 9/16. This revision followed a U.S. court in New York ruling that claimed that some of the FFCRA was invalid or needed further clarification. There really aren't drastic changes, but some that should be noted. First, a disclaimer that I'm not an a labor attorney, so this is a very simplified version of the regulations. There's 5 points that are on this slide. The first one is the ruling reaffirmed that employees may take FFCRA leave only when work is actually available. The New York court found that the DOL had not provided enough explanation for the definition of what work available actually is, so these new regulations define that. The second one is they reaffirmed that employees must have their employer's approval to take intermittent FFCRA. So an employee can take, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday off and work Monday, Tuesday. The New York judge just asked for clarification, and the DOL provided that in the new update. The third one is revise the definition of a healthcare provider. In the initial law, healthcare providers were excluded from receiving benefits if they met a certain very broad definition. Now the definition of healthcare providers and who is actually covered under this law has been narrowed, and now uses the same definition that traditional FMLA uses. And then the fourth clarified that employees must provide employers with documentation to support their leave as soon as possible when the leave is foreseeable. Prior to this revision, the law required workers to provide documentation before taking leave and seek approval before taking any kind of intermittent leave. So now employees just have to notify you as soon as possible when the leave is known or foreseeable. The last one is it corrected an inconsistency of when employees may be required to provide employers notice of their need to take EFML. The revised regulations indicated when EFML is foreseeable, an employee shall provide as much notice as practical. Before it was you had to let them know ahead of time. Now employees can tell you or notify you of their need to take a leave when notice is practical. So just to kind of summarize this, as businesses return back to work and schools reopen, the need for clarification on the FFCRA is really greater now than ever, because you're actually experiencing these situations now.
Yeah, right. Like, I mean, just the first one alone, right? I mean, so many of the business closures didn't even exist when FFCRA first passed, in March. So just the clarification that, hey, you as the employer, you're not legally obligated to provide the paid leave if your governor says you can't even operate, right? So you had the work itself has to be available. I think that's a really important clarification. And then about do you have any clarification around number 2, employees having permission for the intermittent? Because I'm imagining this is revolving more around regular routine daycare kids, etc., impacted family members in adjusting regular work schedules.
That is correct. There was some confusion in the initial law regarding intermittent leave because in certain situations regarding say EPSL, the employee paid sick leave, we don't want employees to, if they have COVID, we don't want employees back on the work site, right? So we didn't want employees going back and forth from working from home for being on site, but the DOL recognized that because the New York judge brought it to their attention, and so they made a clarification that as long as you have to get the employer's approval before you take any kind of intermittent time off.
Yeah, okay, very good. So important updates, and then kind of getting back to, so we're going to do a little deeper dive here, some questions, some Q&A here around the title of today's webinar, which is back to school, right? Because some of this impacted directly that. So I guess the first thing when I think about back to school in remote work, I don't think it was contemplated when this law was first passed that schools would be virtual in the fall term, right? I mean, there's a lot of that stuff that schools were already shutting down for the second term in the spring when this law was contemplated, but not the fall term. So how does this remote work with school, but then also as it relates to school, without school, and then as it relates to school?
Sure. So with remote work, some businesses can allow that to occur and others can't, right? So it's really important to ensure that you're consistent with who can and can't have a change to their work schedule or has the ability to work remotely. This decision, I think, should be based on the duties of the position and consistency within that. So I would advise my clients that if you have a solid business reason to grant a remote work schedule, then that can be supported. And I think understanding that when you grant that flexibility, as you know, once you grant it for one, you're going to have to grant it for others. So just be really careful with your decision making regards to who can and can't work from home. Some people want to, and others want to be in the office, which certainly people can decline working remotely as long as your business is open and available. But if employees are requesting to work remotely, then be consistent in your practices on who gets approved for remote work.
Any guidance, Shannon, around companies who are maybe new to remote work? So there's, I mean, I've had the pleasure of working virtually from home and travel jobs for 20 plus years. It kind of been in the software and the tech world. But there's a lot of companies, especially local companies, that have never had employees that work remote just because there's not a need, because they're right down the street, right? Any caution that you would give folks around remote work, specifically as it relates to leave? Like, are they really working? And how does this tie back into the previous slide where there's guidance that work actually does have to be available? So virtual work doesn't mean not work.
Right. And that's a great question, Mike. I think there are a lot of businesses that I support that are against remote work, right? Their business has never allowed it, and it was really hard for them to make that change when businesses had to shut down. And so I think when businesses were closed and only essential workers were allowed on site, businesses had no choice. But once it opened up a bit and they were allowed to go back on site, they were still reluctant. They wanted everyone back on site. And it was always my recommendation to my clients is, if you can allow remote work, allow it, because it really helps businesses flatten the curve, right? And it prevents COVID in the workplace. And when you bring employees back on site, you have to make sure all your safety and health policies are in place, and you've taken all the precautions, and people are wearing face masks and whatever your state laws require. So if you can allow some flexibility, I know it's hard at first to make that change, but communication is key, right? When you have employees working remotely, is that you try to continue to operate as you have with your regular weekly meetings or check-ins, and make sure that the line of communication is clear and open.
Hey, Shannon, I don't want to get too far off topic, but I think about, I put myself in the shoes of an entrepreneur, started a business, 0 employees, X, number of years, months ago, grew the thing 10, 20, 30 employees pre-pandemic, things are rocking and rolling. Everybody comes into your office, you're all face to face, you see each other day to day. and you're simply just too busy and growing too fast, and relationships are just so good that you never did job descriptions, right?
Right.
Why would now, as employers have to face remote work, why would you as an HR expert guide people that use this trigger event to write job descriptions, and why?
Sure. Job descriptions are they're a needed part of doing business to make sure that all employees know what is expected of them. And I think when the lines get a little blurry, maybe an employee is doing work that they have never done before, right? They're taking on additional duties, maybe because of layoffs or either permanent layoffs or temporary layoffs, and they need to know what's expected of them. So I know job descriptions always get placed on the back burner and they're never a priority until you really need them. But I think a job description in this kind of unfamiliar territory that we're in is really important for employees to feel like they know what is expected of them. And they have kind of a guidebook, especially when they're taking on new responsibilities that maybe they haven't performed in the past.
Yeah, thanks for indulging me on that. I don't want to beat people up and who are entrepreneurs already going through a tough time here, but this is so easy to underestimate the importance of this thing. And I get why so many business owners don't even want them, because they don't want to create a legalistic culture and environment. But it doesn't have to. Job descriptions don't have to look legalistic. They can be really, really simple, but they can be just a fantastic mechanism to communicate and set expectations. But especially in a changing world where work is maybe done in a different way than it was before, and the value can be really big. So okay,
Agreed.
I'll get off that. We'll get off our high horse on that one. Okay, question 2. So, man, I think a bunch of people can relate to the picture in this screen, right? How the heck do you manage childcare and online school while trying to perform work?
That is a challenge, isn't it? And like you said early on in our conversation, is we never thought we would be where we are now, thinking back to March. But here we are. And so some businesses are returning employees back to on-site work. So organizations have a lot of things to think about. There are childcare shortages or closures. Schools are operating either 100% virtually or partially virtually, and we expect that to occur for the foreseeable future, possibly through the end of the year. So what can we do to help employees while daycare and schools are closed? And my recommendation to everyone on this webinar is, can you offer flexibility? If you can offer flexibility, it really helps in the long run. Of course, this will be based on the requirements of the job, and not everyone can allow flexibility. But if you can, your employees will really appreciate the flexibility and the help during this stressful time. Some of the things to think about is, can you provide flexible work hours or remote work or reduced working hours? There's alternate scheduling. For instance, maybe allowing your employees to work 4 10-hour days or 3 12-hour days, or whatever solution you have to allow the employees to be home during school hours on some days, or possibly job sharing. If we can be flexible with employees, then they can continue to work and continue doing their job, and then they won't need to go on emergency family medical leave. But if you aren't allowed or not able to allow employees flexibility, then employees will have EFML to fall back on. But I believe all businesses would like their employees to continue to contribute, and if you can offer flexibility, then recommend at least exploring that idea.
Shannon, they're going to get, people are going to get sick of me talking about job descriptions, but I'm going to come back to it. So just the phrase job description sounds legalistic and it sounds not flexible. Give an example of how we could write a job description, whether it's for the first time ever, with this a trigger event, people working from home, or maybe just a modification from the previous work that was on site to virtual. How do you write in flexibility into a job description?
Well, that's a good question. I think, sometimes you don't have to have a formal job description with all the changes that are going on right now. You could certainly have a core job description of your main job duties and have an email or something going back and forth with further clarification regarding additional duties that have now been assigned to you because someone either had to take emergency paid sick leave or emergency family medical leave and is out for a period of time due to a COVID reason. And so you want some flexibility, and I think, yes, job descriptions are important, but I think with everything that's changing, sometimes you need to be a little fluid, and maybe it's more appropriate not to change the core job description, but to have a different documentation to support whatever new duties are being assigned.
Yeah, that's a smart way of describing it. So maybe it's not even a job description, but but policies. I think the thing I would encourage people to think about is, again, policies by themselves that just sound legalistic and restricting, but your policy could describe the flexible work environment you want to create, but at least you're presenting an equal description, a consistent description of what flexibility looks like at your firm. Because just like nobody anticipated we were going to be here 6 months ago, here we are. You're going to have different employees interpret what flexibility means differently, right? And some are going to be like, man, you're working too hard. You need to take some time. You're killing yourself. There's going to be other people that are simply going to, make an entrepreneurs feel taken advantage of, right? In this complex time. So I'm always going to kind of go back to documentation, if not in the form of job description, at least formal policy. And the formal policy could be as simple as an email that you send to everybody. Hey, during this time, we're going to do such and such. You can't under communicate this kind of thing. So, okay.
Right. Agreed.
Okay. I think everything we've talked this far, Shannon, kind of leads up to like the $1 million question, which is question number 3. We talked about flexibility, we talked about school. At the end of the day, in the context of this webinar, when does EFML apply specific to school, back to school?
Okay. So an employee may take time off under EFML if they are unable to work because he or she must care for his or her child because their school or daycare is closed due to a COVID-related reason and no other providers are available. So what this means is the employee has to actually be caring for their child. And the FFCRA hasn't fully defined what care means, but since EFML is a springboard off of FMLA, we are using the FMLA definition of what care actually means. And care means taking care of the physical or mental state of a child. The law, the EFML, applies to any child under the age of 18. If an employee needs time off for a child that's over the age of 18, that could be granted if the child that's 18 has a disability and they need parental care. But also, the school or daycare has to be closed due to a COVID-related reason, not because they went out of business. But if they're closed due to COVID and no other provider is available, then they may be eligible for EFML. If the child's school offers a choice, which is more common now that we're seeing when kids went back to school just a couple weeks ago, that sometimes there's a choice between in-person learning and remote learning. You are not eligible for EFML if the school is open. So if your child is required to go to school partially in person and partially remote, then you are only eligible for leave when your child is actually going to remote school. So if your kid is on campus doing on-site learning, you're not eligible for EFML benefits.
So to recap this kind of dumbed down for me. If my kid is face-to-face school 5 days a week, I can't take EFML, correct?
Correct.
If the kid is in Monday, Wednesday face-to-face, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday is virtual, I can only take Monday, Tuesday, 2 days a week of EFML.
Correct.
But if my child is in 100% virtual school, as long as they don't have special needs and are under the age 18, I can take EFML.
Right. There is a caveat, of course, a carve out. If your child is 15 to 17, you have to be able to explain why you need to care for that child, because the FMLA definition of what care means is actually taking care of the child, right? Typically, a 15 to 17-year-old doesn't need to be taken care of while they're at home learning. You may need to monitor their school, but that isn't actually caring for the child. If, for instance, if you have a child at home that needs their diaper changed, or they need to be fed, or you need to teach them, right? If you're serving in that instruction capacity, then the leave would apply. So I think there was a little misconception with this law when it originally came out that anyone who was staying at home because their child's school was closed due to COVID would be eligible for EFML. But you have to actually be caring for that child. Some of the questions we got initially when the law first came out in April is, I'm really having a really hard time working because my kids are running around and I can't focus on my work because they're distracting me. Well, that's not what the law was intended to protect. So the definition is that you actually have to be at home caring for your child.
So this is going to tug at heartstrings for both employees and employers, right? So we're don't take anything we say as legal advice. Seek legal counsel when it comes down to really tough decisions. But can we narrow this in for people on this call anymore, Shannon? I think about, I've got a bunch of kids, and I've had kids that at age 15, 16 were no more capable of staying on task in school than, kids much younger have had other kids that were kind of overachiever types, and from grade 2, 3 on, they're self-directed. How the heck do you draw lines in the sand? The difference between needed for care, and I think you got to kind of go back to your FMLA descriptions here about beyond just, hey, you got to make lunch for the kid versus maybe it's not care, nurturing, changing diapers of a potty training preschooler, but maybe this is a kid who just needs constant oversight and interaction to keep them, headphones on and on the Zoom call with their teacher. Right.
So every situation is different, as you can imagine. And in any of these cases, if you are able to work from home, right, this EFML won't even apply. So if you're able to kind of juggle the schoolwork and other responsibilities during the day while your child is at home, then you might not even need to apply for EFML. EFML is paid at 2/3 of your income, of your regular rate of pay. So you're not receiving 100% of your income during this time. So the benefit to you or to your employees is to be able to kind of juggle the two. But if that's not possible, then an employee would want to go on EFML and is eligible for EFML. So I think, while your child is online with school lessons, right, which is a lot of what is happening now, you could probably work during that time, right? But if you're not able to kind of juggle the two, then you would want to go on leave, and then at that point you're not working, of course.
And this is just going to be endless scenarios of I guess defining of what care is, I suppose, right?
Yes, and I don't. I think it's important to be careful. If, for instance, you have a 15-year-old, yes, you have to monitor their homework and make sure they get their homework done or their schoolwork done. But you're basically doing that, right? When you were on site working. But this is if someone needs to be home to care for the child, right? If you have a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old, right? They can't be at home by themselves. So you may have to be monitoring their schoolwork, making sure they're doing their lessons, they're cooking them lunch or breakfast or whatever, and that would be considered care. So yeah. The DOL has a really good FAQ that's online that employees and managers can look at to get further clarification on when EFML may apply.
You know what? I'm glad you went there, and we'll post that on a link to that on our website and share that when we send out the recording after this webinar as well. I suspect that's going to be an important resource for folks. So, sure. Bottom line is, if you have the financial ability to offer the leave, then from a compliance perspective, you're better off erring on the side of the employee and probably not try to get too narrowly defined on definitions here.
Right.
Because you're going to get all 100% of the money back on the next quarterly payroll tax return on your 941 anyway, despite the productivity hit you might take by having some people out more than you want. So but that's almost like hey, that stinks for everybody because we're all in the same boat here. Same storm, so to speak, at least.
Right.
But where this is going to be a sticky wicket is those who are really on the borderline from even having the cash to pay that out in the first place because they're financial burdens. So for you folks that are in that situation, I think regardless, there's way too many. We'll share out that DOL FAQ on helping to clarify whether this qualifies as care or not. So okay, got a few minutes left here. Let's jump into the last couple of questions. I think people who've worked at larger companies, many people have had the pleasure of having an EAP provided to them. A lot of people in small companies may not know what that is. Can you talk about what an EAP is? And we're not selling. We don't have an EAP. We're not selling ourselves. So this is really just purely informational. But why should maybe employers think about providing an EAP and what the benefits might be?
Sure. So an EAP is an employee assistance program. Sometimes it's included in your medical plan or it's a separate policy. Typically, it's a very low cost benefit, but it's also a very underused benefit because a lot of employees don't know about it. It's not communicated as well as maybe it should. But what an EAP is a resource available for employees and typically family members of the employee if they're struggling with depression or anxiety or need childcare resource recommendations. Some EAPs help with wills or any kind of legal documents. So there's a variety of services that EAP provides. But like I said, Employees usually don't know about it, but I think this might be a good time if you do have an EAP, is to communicate that to employees so they know that that is a resource for them. As you may be experiencing, that there are mental health issues out there, and they have increased. Employees are experiencing anxiety and depression really at a higher rate due to COVID mainly. So you need to make sure employees know where to get help. And so you can look to your insurance broker to see whether this is an option for you at your next plan renewal if you don't have one now. But also the CDC website has a really good resource for coping with stress during COVID that you could certainly send to your employees if you think that might be helpful as well.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, Shannon. So if you've already gone through your open enrollment, I know it's the beginning of open enrollment season, it might be too late, but if so a lot of companies are just kind of preparing for their open enrollment season and wrapping up their renewals as they head into the fourth quarter here. But just my own 2 cents, again, we're not plugging anything we don't sell. We don't have an EAP that we sell, but is you're a small business owner, you're looking to save money and offer still offer competitive benefits. This is one of those really unique opportunities where, traditionally an employee assistance program in EAP might include things like smoking cessation or
Right.
Guidance on just healthcare, how to lose weight, how to live a healthy lifestyle, and especially if you're self-insured, depending on what your insurance, your benefit plans look like, can, by adding this benefit, which doesn't cost a lot, can actually save a ton in the backside. It can net out to be a real savings. And then the hidden benefit at a time like this, all of the mental health issues and the resources available with an EAP, huge timing during a pandemic when people have needs like they've truly never had before. So, okay. Let's wrap it up. Last question here, and we'll take it home. I think we got about 5 minutes left anyway. So, given all this context, I think the timing is perfect. Depending where you are in the country, some people have started going back to school mid-August. I think most of the country started school, late, just before or late, right after Labor Day here. So, you have to imagine that now is the time. This next probably week or two. Is these requests are going to start hitting the fan, and how do we help our customers? How do we help small business owners, entrepreneurs, executives of small and mid-sized businesses? How do we help them get ahead of this with their employees?
Well, that's a really good kind of final question to today. Communication is always important, and I think there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of changes going on. So one thing that I recommend is to make sure any kind of changes that we do make, that we make sure they're documented with the adjustments, and then how long those adjustments can be enforced. How flexible can you be? Because what you may offer now, you may have to change in a month or two when business needs change. So you really don't want your good deeds to backfire on you. Also, if employees are working a different schedule, it's really more important now to make sure that you're checking in with them, staying on top of deadlines and performance. If employees are working remotely, make sure you continue with your regular employee meetings. It's more important now than ever to make sure you have those weekly or daily check-ins. We're all really getting used to using Zoom meetings now, so that shouldn't hold you back from having regular conversations. And another idea to promote communication with employees, it might be a good time to do a confidential employee engagement survey to gauge how employees are feeling during this time. You tend to learn some really good things from this feedback, and it may bring to light concerns that employees have that you're unaware of. So, more communication is always better, especially during this time.
Yeah, very good. Okay, that takes us to time. Shannon, as always, love talking to you. Love hearing your insights from all your expertise and experience. And thanks to everyone else for joining us today. So Assure provides human capital management resources, including payroll and tax, time and attendance, and HR software. But important to note, we also provide HR services. So all of the things that Shannon was talking about and how she serves her clients, rather than having to build your own HR department, we can provide these services to you on an outsourced fractional basis that not only cost a fraction of what it would cost to build that in-house, but with an unbelievable amount of resources and expertise and experience that comes along with that. So if you're interested, reach out on the website. And until then, we look forward to talking to you in our next week's webinar. Thanks, Shannon.
Thank you.